Good afternoon. I'll call the House Education Finance Committee to order. And we're still a little short on quorum, so I think in advance of the two bills we're going to be hearing today, House File 567 and House File 1222, both having to deal with compensatory revenue. I have asked our nonpartisan research staff, Mr. Strom, just to give an overview on compensatory revenue, what it is, and I think you all have a spreadsheet that kind of does a run on the school districts currently receiving compensatory revenue, and he will explain that. So I think it'll give us a good context for the bills that we're to hear today. So, Mr. Strom?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. There's three different sets of materials in your folder today. The one we'll start with is the one that's oriented landscape on the page that says FY16 estimated compensatory revenue by site. This is just the first few pages of the site printout because when we calculate formulas at the school site level, we have about 2,200 school buildings in the state, and that printout would be 40-some pages long. We're happy to share the data electronically with folks, and if people would like a printout, happy to do that. But to save paper, we just printed the first couple of pages of that one to use as an example. That's what we'll start with. The second sheet, which is the printout-oriented portrait style, sums the compensatory revenue amounts up to the district level along with the district characteristics and can give you a sense of how each of your districts does on compensatory revenue. And then the third thing in your packet is just a couple of graphs that we'll look at so that you can see some of the different distributions of the revenue and of the children who qualify for compensatory revenue. So there's about a half dozen graphs there. So with that, Madam Chair, let's start with the landscape-oriented printout, the fiscal year 16 compensatory revenue by site. And one other thing I should add, Ms. Johnson's guidebook and my guidebook both have nice descriptions of the program. Ms. Johnson's has a step-by-step calculation in there, so if you look at the guidebooks that are in your folders, if you look at her guidebook, there's three different types of districts that have a compensatory revenue calculated for them, and you can see with some examples there as well. Compensatory revenue is one of the few formulas that's site-based. In other words, instead of being calculated at the district level, it's calculated for each school building. It's based on the number of children who are eligible for free or reduced price meals at that site, and there's a one-year lag in the formula. So, for example, for next year, the fiscal year 16, we use the count from the fall of 2014. The way the printout is oriented is it lists each district and then the buildings within each district. And the first column shows the total enrollment. That's the number of students who attend that building. So if we look at the very first case on the printout, that's the Aiken Secondary School. There's 546 kids that attend that school. The next column shows us that 162 of those children qualify for a free lunch. That means that their income is 135% of the poverty level, the federal poverty level, which is a measure based on family size and adjusts up as the family size gets larger. The next column, the 53 pupils, is the number of pupils who qualify for a reduced price meal, and the reduced price cutoff is set by the federal government at 185% of the poverty level, depending on family size. Free and reduced lunch are our proxy variables that we use to calculate the number of students who may need compensatory revenue by site. We know that there's no direct link between being eligible for free lunch or reduced price lunch and the student's educational needs, but it's a proxy variable for additional need at the school site. The way the formula works is that we take the free lunch count, so in the Aiken Secondary School, the 162 kids, plus 1/2 of the number of reduced price eligible students. So we take half of the 53 students and add that to the 162, and that equals 188.5 children in the Aiken School District that are qualifying for free or 1/2 of the reduced count. We then calculate two percentages. The first percentage listed shows what that percentage of total enrollment is. So the 188 students that qualify in the Aiken School District, that's 34% of that student body that's eligible for free or 1/2 of the reduced price meals. The formula for compensatory, for a variety of reasons, then adjusts that number by saying that divide that number by 0.8. And the reason for this is up until the mid-1990s, compensatory revenue was based on the AFDC counts by district, not the free and reduced lunch count. And in order to get the revenue to match relatively the same amount, this 0.8 was put in there. So the concentration then is 43% for the Aiken Secondary School, the 34.5% divided by 0.8. We then take that concentration times the number of adjusted pupils, so take 43.15% times 188, and that's as if there were 49 compensatory pupil units. That's the third from last column. That 49 pupil units is then multiplied by a variation of the formula allowance, which is $4,992. That's the $5,831 formula allowance, less some changes for when we changed pupil weights and that kind of thing. And the net revenue then for the Aiken Secondary School is $243,000 or $446 per enrollee. If you look up one line, you'll see that state total revenue on average is $609. And as you look up and down the list here, you can see that there's some real big differences. Let's drop down about 5 lines, and there's a nice contrast between the Lake Harriet Lower Elementary School in Minneapolis and the Bancroft Elementary School. These two schools will point out the effect of concentration in the formula. The Lake Harriet Lower Elementary School in Minneapolis serves 32.5 free and half of the reduced price lunch students. That's a 7% concentration factor. That means that that building only receives about a $7,000 of compensatory revenue, or roughly $13 per enrollee. The very next district, or the very next school in that district, rather, is the Bancroft Elementary School. You can see that Bancroft has nearly 83% free and reduced lunch students, which, when divided by 0.8, pushes you all the way up to 1.0. So that school building receives $1.359 million of compensatory revenue, or $2,495 per pupil. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing the concentration is the amount per free and reduced lunch eligible student is not the same per district. It varies by the concentration. The greater the percentage, the higher the funding per free and reduced lunch student. And you can look up and down the list here and see the wide variation about, among buildings. Then the next step in the formula, after we've calculated at the building level, let's back up to the Aiken School District again. If we take the 3 programs in the Aiken School District and add the revenue amounts together for those 3 buildings, that turns out on the portrait style printout to be $679,000. And you can see district by district how much that varies for each of the districts, that including your own districts, on that printout. So, Madam Chair, to emphasize on the calculation here before we go to look at the graphs, the way the concentration formula works is the greater percentage you have qualifying at any one site, the more revenue per site. A couple of points to measure or to mention about that. That means that the size of the site matters. And if you have one very poor site and one relatively well-to-do site, you're going to get a different concentration than if you were to add those 2 sites together and treat them as one. So if you look at, again, the 4th and 5th lines of the landscape portrait, there's, or the 5th and 6th rather, there's an example of one very poor site, the Bancroft site, and one not so poor site, the Lake Harriet site. If you were to average those 2 together, you'd get a number less than half of that. You'd get a number more like a third of that because of the way the concentration works. So the concentration is an intentional part of the compensatory revenue formula. All told, the formula spends the second largest amount of any of the general ed components, about $520-some million per year. So, Madam Chair, that's a quick discussion of the concentration, and then I thought I'd look at the graphs if you'd like me to do that next real quickly.
Yes, please go ahead. Representative Murphy.
Then, just for clarification, is the money for the students at each individual site that's awarded to the site or the school district for that site, is that amount of money supposed to be used for those children only?
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, it's supposed to be used at that site only, and that's what we're going to have two bills on today, but it's not for the specific children who qualify, it's for that site. So there's not necessarily a tie-in to the children who generated that money who are free and reduced lunch. It's for the site that they are attending. So for example, if there's 20 children in a classroom and 10 of those are free and reduced lunch, the teacher doesn't need to know which 10 those are that are free and reduced lunch eligible. The school can choose to deliver the compensatory programming however they choose to do so at that classroom. It doesn't have to be tied to the students who earn that money. It's tied to the building where those students are located.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, just to give you some quick overview of the different levels of concentration, I just grabbed a couple of quick graphs out of a document that Ms. Johnson and I put together that looks at compensatory revenue, and that's the set of graphs that's in your packet. And if you all turn to those, it's a very rich database. It's fun for us to look at. It's hard to summarize in some ways in any sort of meaningful way for a district or for a committee this size because there's so many districts involved. But we made some general categories. If you look at the percent of students receiving free and reduced lunch and divide them by type of district, by location, Minneapolis and St. Paul, in measuring the last 10 years, were about 66% eligible for free and reduced lunch in 2004, and in 2014, about 69% eligible. So you can see the core cities have changed relatively little in their percent of students eligible since 2003. Greater Minnesota's the next line shown, which tracks very closely to the statewide average, has gone up about 10 percentage points from 29% to 38%. The statewide average has gone up just a little quicker than Greater Minnesota from 28% to 38%. And then finally, Madam Chair, if you look at the bottom line on the first graph, you can see that all of the rest of the 7-county metro area, absent the core cities, has gone from 17.7% to 32%. The next chart then breaks down the metro area a little more, and the same line for Minneapolis and St. Paul is at the top there. The next line shows the charter schools that are located within the metropolitan area. And then the statewide line is the same as before. And then breaking the suburbs into inner ring and outer ring suburbs, you can see the inner ring suburbs are now at the state average, and the outer ring suburbs are still quite a bit below the state average. But the trends in the inner ring, outer ring, and greater Minnesota are all relatively reaching the level of the statewide average, with the one exception being the outer ring suburbs. The next chart I thought might be interesting for the committee to look at the amount of compensatory revenue that goes to districts based on the 2003 to 2015 measurements in these same categories. And you can see, because of the relative concentration and the relative large number of free and reduced lunch students in Minneapolis and St. Paul, in 2003, not quite 50% of all compensatory revenue went to those two districts. That's dropped in half, not because their revenues changed, but because everyone else, all the other districts in the state, have gotten relatively more poor in terms of the student body they're serving. And so now in 2015, the second line on that top part of the graph there, the 24%, shows the current share of the statewide compensatory revenue that those two districts get. Inner ring suburbs dropped from about 36 to 35% of the total. Outer ring suburbs grew from about 6% of the total revenue to 14%. Charter schools statewide grew from about 4% to 11%. And Greater Minnesota grew from about 4% to 9%. Starting a few years ago, we began paying, the state began paying compensatory revenue to certain cooperatively run programs, and these show up in the other category. There's probably some better ways to portray that, but that change isn't so much as use as that change in payment occurs. Just a couple of...
All right, we have a few questions, so why don't we suspend for a moment, and I'll go. And Representative Murphy, I've held off on Representative Hertaus, so can I go to him, and then I'll come back to you. Representative Hertaus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Strom, on the graphic pieces that you put out showing the students receiving free and reduced lunch, while those first two graphics show that Minneapolis-St. Paul has been fairly constant or flat, and we've seen by virtue of the dates covered for the last 10 years that there's been a slow and steady gradual increase in statewide and suburban metro. I'm wondering if you could comment. Some of this seems to be more drastic since the recession, and is it that the qualifications for free and reduced lunch were lowered so that more students were eligible, or do you think it was a function of loss of household income that put these people into that group?
Mr. Strong.
Madam Chair, Representative Hertaus, Ms. Johnson is going to speak a bit to this in the forecast estimating as well, but let me make a couple comments on this. One thing that's true in Minnesota as well as nationwide is the general public school population is getting relatively poorer each year. The qualifications have stayed the same as a percent of the federal poverty line. There's a lot of literature in the academic area about whether or not the poverty line is set in the right place or not, and whether it's a meaningful measure as much as it would have been a number of years ago. But that aside, even prior to the recession, we had a fairly constant growth year to year in the number of compensatory eligible, the number of free and reduced lunch eligible by district. It certainly got greater during the recession and increased at a faster level. And when Ms. Johnson goes through her comments, this is going to be one of the big causes of the adjustment. And Madam Chair, I don't know if you'd like to have Ms. Johnson speak to that now, if you don't mind, in terms of what that means for the forecast for the next few years. But that change, we expect that, and the Department of Education expects that growth in the number of children eligible for free and reduced lunch to continue to increase over the next few years, but at a slower rate than it increased over the last 5 years.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Johnson, why don't you go ahead and fill in the rest of the blanks there.
Madam Chair, members, the component, one of the biggest pieces of the revision of the forecast for this from November to February was a change in the projected growth in the poverty concentration for compensatory revenue. About $48.8 million of a revision was made due to that. And part of that was explained as from FY13 to FY14, there was a basically flat level of increase in compensatory concentration growth, poverty concentration growth, but over the last 9 out of the last 10 years, the trend line has been moving upward, and so there was a revision to account for the downward rate of growth, but overall the trend line is increasing overall upward. So.
Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know with other federal programs, oftentimes they use a multiplier of the federal poverty level for qualification, and I think my question was directed at that. So the qualification and formula for free and reduced lunch has been constant through this 10 years, or have we made it, the program made it more eligible for participants in free and reduced?
Madam Chair, Representative Hertaus, that percentage has been constant since we switched to the free and reduced lunch count as opposed to the AFDC count in the mid-90s. That's been at the free and reduced lunch standard, which has been at the 135 and 185% of poverty, respectively. And for lunch purposes, which that measurement has been used, that's been that way since at least the last 30-some years.
Representative Hertaus.
Okay, well, that answers how the formula hasn't changed, but my question is, has the federal poverty, definition of federal poverty level changed, which is going to affect the formula by virtue of your percentages you apply?
Mr. Strong.
Madam Chair, Representative Hertaus, we're getting out of my area of expertise here, so I don't want to overstate this. I'll do some research and get back to you. I think the bigger fight, I think less so than whether that definition of poverty has changed, has been whether or not that definition of poverty really measures poverty or not, particularly when there's supplemental programs that don't count in that poverty measure. So, for example, if individuals have health care provided separately, does the poverty level mean the same thing than if it doesn't? And those tend to be more where we see the journal articles and things written about federal poverty level and what it means. But I'm not aware of like adjustments to other kinds of trends like CPI or GDP where there's these periodic adjustments. I'm not aware of those on the federal poverty level. But again, I'm outside of my area of expertise here. So I will send an email to the committee after doing a little checking.
Thank you.
And, Madam Chair?
Representative Hertaus.
Yeah, thank you. And in my first year of service on this committee, I noticed that those who had served many more years than me and those who have experience in education would always be asking in this committee as a qualifier of their evaluating certain merits of different things, always would ask the question, how much free and reduced lunch, how much free and reduced lunch? And so now, looking at the charts and the revenue streams, I understand why they're asking that question. Thank you.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Strom, why, you just explained the share of statewide compensatory revenue. Why would we care?
Mr. Strom.
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, I think there's several reasons why this committee would care. One of those is that when we look at printouts that show district-by-district funding, there's a lot of concern about who gets what and individual districts, why there's variation. Compensatory revenue, unlike the formula allowance, which is designed to be the same for everyone in the state, compensatory revenue is the biggest disequalizing factor in our funding system, but it's intentionally done so by the legislature that has said this is a formula that we want to distribute money differently to different school districts depending on their characteristics.
Representative Murphy.
Madam Chair, Mr. Strom, did you say disequalizing?
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, yes, in the sense that some districts receive more revenue under that than others. It's intentionally changing the formula so that there's not a flat amount district by district. It's intentionally saying some districts should receive more because of this poverty factor. And in the world of school finance equity, that means it's a disequalizing resource, provides some more than others, but for many folks, that's the direction they think that revenue should be provided because it's affecting those districts with higher concentrations of students of poverty. But the point I'm making is that a lot of the issues in this committee resolve around why don't districts all receive the same amount of funding? And anything that provides in a district with an additional amount tends to drive that spread between those that receive the base level and those that receive additional amounts on top of that.
Representative Murphy.
Madam Chair, Mr. Strom, but this committee historically then has made this equalizing thing their number one priority next to every student shall have a certain amount of money. Is that not correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, yes.
So you're trying to show the share of statewide so we will know if that is still going to be our top priority next to the per pupil unit.
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, I'm trying to do several things here. That's certainly one of them. I'm also trying to show that formulas like this can have big changes in distribution over time. So 10 years ago, for example, Minneapolis and St. Paul would have been primarily the only folks, I shouldn't say the only, but would have been the folks most likely affected by the compensatory formula. Now, 10, 12 years later, a lot of other districts find themselves in very similar situations to Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so the idea is to try and give a characteristic change of where compensatory revenue is growing at and how that looks by region of the state. It's not an attempt to pick on any group of districts or anything like that. It's an attempt to highlight how these changes have occurred and how these distributions have occurred with a formula that's essentially been unchanged over that time period, which is reflecting the underlying demographic then of how the student count of free and reduced lunch students has changed within Minnesota over those years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Strom, looking at the graph on page 3, does this mean that the number of free and reduced kids in the inner ring suburbs now is greater than the number in Minneapolis and St. Paul?
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, no, but it means the relative percent of the compensatory revenue that's going to the center city districts compared to the relative percent that's going to the inner ring suburbs has changed. And that really, if you go back to that first and second graph, those really tell you about that change in the underlying student population. And this third chart is trying to encompass all sorts of things. Probably should have put about 20 graphs together here to convey these different messages, because one of the things this doesn't convey is a student-adjusted level of this, and there are different levels of students in each of those groups. But what it's trying to portray is that there's very different distribution now than 12 years ago of compensatory revenue. For example, if you were to student adjust this, the charters now are about 5% of the statewide total enrollment, about 11% of the compensatory. Minneapolis and St. Paul are not quite 10%, I think more like 8% now of the student population, about 24% of the revenue. So there's a lot of ways to present this data. And the idea was just to give you some sense of how the revenue is shifting among our different classes of districts.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And looking at the portrait sheet, District 518, Worthington is showing 70.3% free and reduced. How are they comparing compensatory dollars with the Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the inner ring?
Mr. Strom.
Madam Chair, Representative Quam, on page 4 of the portrait printout, District 518 is Worthington, and you can see there, of their almost 3,000 students, 70% of them are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So they're compensatory per free and reduced lunch, or sorry, per student. That very last column, $2,456 dollars per kid on average. And if you looked back at the first page, for Minneapolis at $2,554, it's about the same as Minneapolis, and then St. Paul is District 625, and they're at $2,642. So one of the things you're seeing here for Worthington, they're actually at a slightly higher concentration than Minneapolis, but because of the site level concentrations, they're getting slightly less compensatory than Minneapolis, because Minneapolis, as you saw on that on that site by site printout, has some sites that have very few poor kids and other sites that have a great many. There are many fewer schools in Worthington. There's just one high school in Worthington. I'm not sure if I think there's just one elementary in Worthington, and as a result, there would be a different there would be more revenue in Worthington if they had two elementaries and the income levels were different for the students at those two sites. That's one of the drawbacks of a site-based formula with a concentration built into it. But in terms of that overall number, that number in Worthington is pretty similar to the numbers in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Representative Quam.
Thank you. So if, similar to where districts were moving their official office address to being just in the metro counties in order to game the system and get greater funding, if Worthington, who is higher in free and reduced as a district, were to game the system by stacking different locations to play the site game, they would then be able to, instead of being below Minneapolis, St. Paul, for per pupil funding for compensatory, even though they're a higher percentage free and reduced, that they too could get more and possibly even be above Minneapolis and St. Paul for per pupil if you had sufficient staff to be able to understand how to game the formulas.
Madam Chair, Representative Quam, I think in principle that's true. My guess is that very few school boards and very few districts are actually trying to adjust their boundaries in any way that reflects that. Nearly every school board would rather have a greater mix than a more segregated level of free and reduced lunch at any site. So my guess is if a district like Worthington built a new school, they would probably end up with some income differential between the two and have slightly, if they built a new elementary school, I just checked the list here, and they do just have the one big elementary school with nearly 1,200 kids at that school. If they were to build a second, my guess is no matter how they constructed their boundaries, they would likely end up with a differential in the number of free and reduced lunch kids there and generate slightly more compensatory. But that would be probably against what the school board is intending to do there, and given the cost of buildings and how attendance boundaries get set for other kinds of things, I'm guessing that that's very low on the list of any districts in order to game a formula like that.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I would hope that districts would try to be more integrated instead of being less integrated and getting more money.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, Representative Quam answered, I got part of my answers to that, but Mr. Strom, still a little bit more, because I'm a first grade teacher and I don't deal with complicated math like this very often. But when my school district in Greater Minnesota says it costs the same amount of money to educate, a free and reduced lunch child as it should in the Twin Cities, I think the equity part, are they getting at this part that we're talking about, that these schools that have a greater mass get a different amount of money per student? Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Bennett, yes, I believe that's what they're getting at. There's no metro, non-metro division in the formula. There's no additional weighting. If Minneapolis's building characteristics were the same as Albert Lee's, the funding would be identical. I think the bigger issue there is often these multiple sites, and the concentration at these sites is sometimes the issue that we hear the most about. The Anoka School District, for example, Representative Newton's district, is one that has very large sites and has in past years come to the committee and shown that if their sites were smaller, their amount of compensatory revenue would be larger, because there would be essentially, no matter how they did their boundaries, there'd be an unequal number of free and reduced lunch eligible at each of those sites. So I believe the argument that districts make is that there shouldn't be, that districts like yours might make, is that there shouldn't be concentration or not as much concentration because a student in a classroom with 19 poor children out of 20 gets more money per poor child than a student with a classroom with 10 out of the 20. So that's really the concentration effect, but there isn't anything that's metro, non-metro, or site or area specific to the formula. It's merely a concentration at the site level that's driving the formula.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I guess I was going to ask the question first, but then I saw this and was answered that, except for the fact that and Mr. Strom, maybe you didn't mean it, but I thought you said that it was a negative to do it this way, and that, that a district might want it. But as I recall, not having been on the committee before, but I thought the money for compensatory had to go to the site. It can't go for administrative costs and other stuff. It has to go to the site. So that means it is going to the school with concentration. And you can argue all you want about that, there's not worse problems in the classroom from having 19 to 20 than 10 to 20, but this has been studied by Brookings Institution for 30 years and many others now, and they all show the same problems. When you concentrate it more, it creates multiples of the types of problems that you have from fewer. So I would disagree very strongly if that's what you were saying.
Madam Chair, Representative Mullery, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that concentration is the issue, and that policymakers such as yourself can make the argument that concentration affects it or not. The literature, as you say, certainly suggests that concentration matters, but whether it's concentrated or not, it doesn't matter to me. That's not my job. That's your job. But if my comments made it sound like it shouldn't, my comments should be neutral on that, just as whether the spread is too great or too narrow is not my business. That's yours as elected officials, your business, and my job's to try and explain how that concentration works and the effect it has. And whether that effect is good or bad, again, is not my judgment. That's your all judgment about whether that effect is the right effect or too much of the right effect or not enough of the right effect.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I think other questions, I just wanted to, again, we had a very brief overview when we started the session on some of our funding streams, but I thought because we're hearing a couple of bills on compensatory, it'd be good to get into the details of that a little bit. Okay, and so Mr. Strom or Ms. Johnson, whoever, if you want to talk about what the money can be used for in the stream of compensatory revenue. We've had a couple of questions a little bit about that with regards to site versus not, but any other parameters around it. And then we will turn to the two bills on the agenda for today.
Madam Chair, members, the statute not only has the formula in it, but in 126C15 also lists the uses that compensatory revenue can be used for. And those uses, let me read a partial list. There's 12 uses in statute. Those lists, this is in 126C15, include remedial instruction in reading, mathematics, and other content areas, additional teachers and aides to provide more individualized instruction, a longer school day or week, comprehensive and ongoing staff development, instructional materials, programs to reduce truancy, encourage graduation, completion of high school, etc., bilingual programs, all-day kindergarten, which is still on the list, even though nearly all districts are doing that now. Early education programs are an entitled use of compensatory revenue, and when we get into the specific bills today, you'll see the current language for those, and then parent involvement programs. So, Madam Chair, there's a list in 126C15 of those 12 uses. They're quite broad, and just as the formula's been a series of conversations in this committee, so too has the allowable uses and whether it's the right amounts and the right things that are in the eligible uses and whether they're too broad or not broad enough.
All right. Thank you. Anything else to add before we turn to the legislation?
No, Madam Chair, I would just add that Ms. Johnson and I can produce, the last 2 pages in here are some sample districts. We can produce for any district if they want to see how the trends have changed. We wanted to highlight a few districts in the metro area where the change has been significant. As Representative Quam pointed out, the Worthington School District has had tremendous change over the last 10 years as well. We're happy to work up individual examples and graph individual changes. The problem we have on compensatory in terms of the information is that it is a 40-some page printout at the site level and it gets unwieldy in a hurry, but we're happy to give you those printouts electronically. We're happy to provide graphs, et cetera. So.
Thank you. All right, and Representative Dabney, I'll let you have the last question before we move to the bills. And members, we will come back to this discussion after the presentation on the bills, and you can ask questions on those particular proposals. We'll have a brief presentation just on the forecast, which had some information pertaining to compensatory, and we can also loop back to general questions at that time as well.
Right.
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Strom, I'm sorry if I missed this. You went over the allowable uses. I'm officially old because I've now been here long enough to remember when we added to those uses and now we're trying to take away. Provide more flexibility when I've been here when we tried to provide less. Can you remind me, and if you said this, I apologize, what percentage of compensatory revenue currently has to stay at the site where the students are generating it?
Madam Chair, Representative Dabney, that's going to get right into your bills here, but currently 90%, at least 90% stays at the site. 5% can be reallocated by the school board to any other site under current law, and up to an additional 5% can be used on early education programs district-wide. So right now, the current law is 90% at the site where it's generated. And there's one exception to that. There are districts that are in a pilot program where they have submitted to the department other methods of distributing that. There's, I think, a half dozen districts or so in those, and those can distribute their compensatory according to the plan they've submitted to the department.
Representative Dabney.
Madam Chair, just another quick follow-up. What's the history on that 90% number? Has that been fairly static over time? Has it gone up and down. It can't go up much.
Madam Chair, Representative Dabney, the current formula replaced the AFDC funding formula for compensatory in the mid-90s. AFDC was calculated at the district level, and so at that point in time, it was all district-based. When we made the switch in the mid-90s, the legislature put it on free and reduced lunch at the site level, and it started at 100% at the site. I don't remember the exact year that the 5% flexibility to the board was granted, more than 10 years ago, I believe. And then it's been in the last half dozen years that the additional 5% was granted for the early education programs.
Thank you, Mr. Strom. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, so Representative Wills, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also have two testifiers. Do you want me to have them join me now, or?
Yes, why don't you go ahead, and then if you want to... All right. Representative Wills, if you want to formally move your bill, House File 567, and I believe the motion would be to re-refer to the General Register with the intent of the chair to lay the bill over for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move House File 567 to the General Register with the possibility to be laid over.
Thank you. And with that, please go ahead and present your testimony, and then if you want to introduce your testifiers as well, that would be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for hearing this bill. And we got a very thorough overview on the compensatory funding from Mr. Strom and staff. And I just want to say thank you for that overview. I think it sets up why we're looking at the changes in this bill. And Representative Dabney, I think, led right into it with the 90% that's currently required to stay at the site level. And what this bill would do would change that to requiring up to 50%. So it creates more flexibility for the school district to use about half of that funding to reallocate to other schools within the district if there's greater need at another site that maybe they wouldn't be able to have the funds to do it under the strict formula that we currently have. So that's essentially what the bill does, and I have testifiers here to speak to how it affects them in their districts.
All right, thank you, Representative Wills. Welcome, gentlemen. Whoever wants to go first, please, if you would just give us your full name for the record, and then we welcome your testimony.
All right, thank you. My name is Jeff Solomon, and I am with the Rosemont-Apple Valley Egan School District, the Director of Finance and Operations. Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about House File 567. Again, my name is Jeff Solomon. I'm Director of Finance and Operations for Rosemont-Apple Valley Egan Schools. We are the fourth largest district in the state. District 196 serves more than 27,400 students in 9 communities that covers 110 square miles in the South Metro area. I'm here to speak in support of House File 567, which provides for increased school board flexibility for the allocation of compensatory revenue. Compensatory revenue funding is made available through the state to provide additional assistance and programming for students performing below identified standards appropriate for learners of their age, but only to schools that have economically disadvantaged students in attendance. This bill would allow school boards the authority to allocate up to 50% of compensatory funding throughout our district schools for the purpose of providing additional effective programs and services that are supported by our district learning leadership team. This bill will increase local authority and decision-making ability with the goals of providing uniform and effective services throughout our schools. It would allow for systematic improvement across the district where services are needed. Now, in our district, compensatory dollars in our elementary schools range from a high of $638,000 at one school to the lowest amount of $11,000 at another school. Both schools have a need for and would like to offer four-year-old programs for targeted population. Only one school can afford to offer the opportunity to their attendance area families. Last year, the principal in the school receiving the highest level of funding stated that if she could, she would like to give some of her compensatory dollars to help other schools. House File 567 would provide a mechanism to support a district approach to targeted preschool and other programming that helps close the achievement gap. Again, it is a systems approach to learning in the district. On behalf of Apple Valley Egan Public Schools, AMS and AMSD, we are asking your support of House File 567, which will provide our district and others more flexibility to provide effective and consistent compensatory services through our district schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Welcome.
Hey, Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Steve Yanowski. I'm the superintendent of Richfield Public Schools, and I am here to speak today about greater control locally in regard to compensatory education funding. A little bit of background on Richfield Public Schools. We're a suburban district of which we have nearly 70% students of color. Approximately 66% of our students live in poverty, and 35% speak English as a second language. Some of the highlights of our district include our most recent graduation rate, where for the first time in over 10 years, 81.4% of our students graduated in 4 years, which is higher than the state average, and something we're very proud of, and something our compensatory education is supporting in terms of its funding. But I'm really here to talk about our elementary schools. We have 4 elementary schools, and I want to talk a little bit about 2 of them and how the lack of funding flexibility makes decisions for me and decisions for our students that I would not make. It hurts our chances for higher student achievement. One of our schools is Richfield Dual Language School. 60% poverty, 50% of our students speak English as a second language, and it's been identified as a statewide focus school, meaning that its achievement and achievement gap are in the bottom 10% of all Title I schools across the state of Minnesota. Centennial Elementary, another school within our district, has 85% poverty. Now, the comparison of these 2 schools, MCA scores in reading are 3 points plus higher at Centennial Elementary than Richfield Dual Language, and 10% higher in mathematics. So our higher poverty school has higher achievement in reading and higher achievement in math than our lower poverty school. At Centennial, we offer due to compensatory funding. Then we are able to offer at Richfield Dual Language. We have smaller class sizes. We have a pre-K program. We have more English as a second language support, despite a higher percentage of English language students. We have more reading and math intervention support at Centennial versus Richfield Dual Language School, despite our achievement being lower at Centennial Elementary School. And we have smaller class sizes at Centennial Elementary than Richfield Dual Language than we do at Richfield Dual Language School. And why do we make these decisions? Because we're not able to utilize our compensatory education in a way that would align to achievement. Within Richfield Public Schools, poverty is a great factor in determining a correlate with student achievement. However, there are factors beyond just poverty that correlate to student achievement. Flexibility of funding would allow us at our local level to make decisions to support our students at Richfield Dual Language School, again, a statewide focus school, in a more differentiated fashion and provide additional supports than we can right now due to that lack of flexibility of funding. So that is why I'm here today to talk about House Bill 567 and to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other testifiers, Representative Wells?
I do not.
All right. Is there anyone else from the general public who wishes to testify on House File 567? And members, my intent is, because the 2 bills are similar and we have Representative Hertaus present his bill and any testifiers, and then we'll open to questions. Is that all right? And I have you on the list first, Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Pardon? So can we go ahead and present Representative Hertaus's bill first,
Sure.
and then we'll go to questions?
I'd prefer that.
Thank you. All right. So with that, thank you. And if gentlemen, you would stick close, because we're going to open to questions on both bills, so we may need to bring you back. Yes. Yes. And while we're switching seats, let's see, Representative Anderson, would you like to move the minutes in your packets from the February 26th meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, I move the minutes of the meeting.
All right, any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you, Representative Anderson. All right, Representative Hertaus.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members. I would like to move House File 1222 to be possibly sent to the General Register.
All right, and with that, and the chair's intent would be to lay it over today. Please go ahead and present your testimony.
Well, thank you very much. And we've had a great overview, and particularly even the last testifiers with regard to the other bill. Probably some of the history of how this compensatory funding might be curtailed to specific uses and specific locations. Oftentimes, there's been an old saying that with shekels come shackles. And I think there was always some intent to have some accountability to make sure that the money that was generated was actually targeted for specific use. But what we've learned over the last many years is that with regard to some of the ways that this money is legally permissible to be used would allow for greater flexibility with the school districts to target that programming, and especially in areas of early education. And so what House File number 1222 does is basically remands all of the money to local control and gives the school boards complete authority to use the funds district-wide to implement its judgment and best use of funds under the compensatory revenue program.
Thank you. Representative Hertaus, just a quick question. Would your bill change any of the uses that are currently in statute, those 12 uses that Mr. Strom detailed?
No, it wouldn't change the uses. It just changes the allocation of percentages that can be used district-wide.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Did you have any testifiers, or did the gentleman who just testified in Representative Will's bill, did you have any comments you wish to offer on House File 1222? All right. Is there anyone else from the audience or general public who wishes to testify in House File 1222? Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members of the committee. Scott Kronquist with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. And our legislative platform strongly supports increased flexibility for locally elected school boards with relation to compensatory funding. And we had actually worked with Representative Wills on her bill and didn't realize that Representative Hertaus had an idea of his own in mind, but our board is all about local control. And so we are very happy to thank Representative Hertaus for bringing this forward, and we think it offers another alternative for you to consider. And so I'll leave it at that, but we just think locally elected officials that know that the needs of their students and how their schools are configured are in the best position to make these decisions, and so we hope you will look favorably upon giving your locally elected school boards more flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kronquist. Representative Hertaus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, if you think about this, you know, for the smallest school districts and the ones without a lot of buildings and facilities, this probably doesn't impact them that much. But certainly for the larger districts where they can carry out programming district-wide, this would certainly be useful. So with that, I'll do I have another testifier?
You do.
Okay. So with that, I'll introduce our next testifier.
Well, that's a great intro, Madam Chair and members. My name is Grace Kelleher, and I represent the Minnesota School Boards Association. We represent every school district in the state of Minnesota. And we're here to actually support both of these bills. We're talking about local control to go forward in situations. And I believe to say one size fits all for every school district isn't a fair assumption. Our school districts really differ greatly across the state, and giving us flexibility to put those dollars where students have the best chance of success is pivotal. You ask us to do a big job. It'd be nice if you untied our hands so we could at least try and manage the best we can. So we think these two bills give us more control locally to put those dollars where kids need them. I know Anoka Hennepin has been granted sort of authority to do this over 5 years. They've brought in data. They've showed it was successful But, you know, somehow we never get beyond just trying 3 or 4 districts. It always sort of stagnates there. And when it's clear that this might be a good option for everybody in the state, that just seems to be where we fall apart. So it would be nice to now take a great idea and make it statewide. So with that, Madam Chairman, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kelleher. Any other testifiers? All right, with that, I think we'll then go ahead and move to member questions. And Representative Murphy, I will add you to the list.
Thank you.
First up, Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, as a former local elected official, I have to say, first and foremost, what local elected officials want more than anything else, is for the state to send them boatloads of money with no requirements, no reporting requirements, no mandates, of course. Just send us the money and we will fulfill our community's mission and our local elected officials' philosophy, and we will educate children. So I get that. But I don't think that that's realistic. I don't think that that's probable. I don't think that that serves Minnesotans well with regard to kids, especially with regard to the factors by which the state sends you the money. You know, we're talking about poverty. We're talking about poor kids. What assurance, my first question is, what assurances do we have that the delivery of services is going to be equal to or better than we currently have, looking at the list of allowable uses? Secondly, at the present time, districts can use 5% of their compensatory funding based on the prerogatives of the school board. So in one bill, we're going from 5 to 100%. Representative Hertaus, I think that's a little radical. And in the other bill, we're going from 5 to 50. That's a little more palatable. And then there's the early education piece. You already can take 5% of the money and devote to early education. So can you convince me a little bit that this is a problem and that your fix is admirable? And lastly, I just have to say, in my 10 years here on this committee, I haven't had one elected school board member ever tell me, just send us compensatory money and let us spend it. And I've never heard from one of my superintendents, and you know how much they complain all the time. And not one superintendent has ever asked me to deal with this issue of compensatory funding. So could you take off from there a little bit and make me feel better about this?
Well, it's certainly my intention to make you feel as warm and fuzzy as we can. You know, I've only been here, this is my third year, but in every year I hear from superintendents in our district about advocating for more local control, more flexibility with regard to compensatory funding and even the categorical funding. One of the ways that we can move away from this one-size-fits-all approach is to really believe and trust in our local school boards that they know and empower them to have strong leadership at the school board level and strong leadership with our teachers and also our principals that the programming is developed. Now, this bill doesn't take away the disciplines of how the money is spent, it's where the money is spent. And that allows them to move it around within the district and create programs within the guidelines, but it gives them that authority to move it around within the district and offer programs throughout the district that aren't necessarily targeted at that building where the revenue was generated from.
Representative Van Zils.
But Representative Hertaus, the funding stream is based on the uniqueness of the kids at each site. What could possibly be in your mind that you would take from the formula and the funding stream that's allocated to kids with needs? That's what the formula is based on, but you would want the flexibility to take that money and put it in another district, in another site. Can we be assured that those other sites have a profile that's similar to the site that generated the revenue? Or can you convince me that there are unique needs in that other site that are not being met? Just what's the deal here?
Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Anzel, I guess I would respond to that by suggesting that over the last many years we're learning the value and the importance of early learning, and that we can circumvent basically and try and close the achievement gap. Overall, these districts, I would presume, are somewhat consistent with regard to their population within the district and to how that's represented at the different schools and facilities. I don't think for 1 minute that a single school board would spend or expend and waste all of the money on a single purpose or a single program and ignore those areas within the district where that revenue was generated by its formula. This is really just about local control, and I trust local school boards to have the prudence and care to not abuse the freedom that would be given to them.
Representative Wells or Mr. Yanowski, I think you wanted to comment on that as well.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple comments, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Yuneski. He had a couple comments as well. Just thinking about the intention behind changing the formula, and in talking to my superintendent, District 196, and Jeff Solomon is here from District 196 as well, speaking in favor of the bill. When I spoke with my superintendent, she was very, very grateful and very encouraged that she would be able to have some flexibility to help students within the district who otherwise wouldn't get the help that they need. And I believe that at the local level, the school boards, the administration, the superintendents, and the principals, as they're working together, they know the kids the best. They know where those services need to be targeted. And just because we look at a spreadsheet that shows free and reduced numbers, we don't know necessarily the family circumstances behind each of those kids. We don't know necessarily how severe the challenges are for each of those kids. But the school district level and those administrators and principals and the superintendents, they know those families. And that's why I think it's best to put the decision-making and the flexibility in their hands as it comes to the dollars. But I know Mr. Yuneski had a couple comments as well.
Thank you, and thank you, members of the committee. So perhaps I'll share something with you that superintendents haven't said before, which is I'm not asking for not to report. I'm not asking for a set of expectations not to be given. But in terms of supporting the bill, it's in regard to flexibility. Some examples that I might have are that at Centennial, where we do our instruction in English, I'm able to purchase for them books in Spanish. As I shared with the Senate committee, I'm able to buy them a book about Sonia Sotomayor, our Chief Justice and the only Latina Chief Justice in the United States of America. At RDLS, where we have a higher Latino population, I'm not able to purchase those same books because the funds are not flexibly be able to use between our Richfield Dual Language School and our Centennial School. The achievement at Centennial School, again, a higher poverty school, is higher than our Richfield Dual Language School. And so the funds are greater at Centennial. I'm able to provide more reading intervention, more math intervention at that school, despite the achievement in reading and math at Richfield Dual Language being lower. And so with more flexibility, what would I do? And I can't speak to all districts and all school boards. With greater flexibility, what I would do would be to provide more dual language appropriate literature, which is a best practice in ELL instruction. I would provide literature that shows mentors and role models to our students that I can't otherwise provide, and I would provide greater levels of intervention support in reading and math to ensure that our students at Richfield Dual Language School are able to close the achievement gap in a way that the current flexibility of funding does not allow me to provide. And I'd be happy to provide whatever documentation to report that back to both the committee and the legislature if that were a requirement.
Thank you. Representative Ansels?
Thank you for your excellent answers, all three of you. I just remain fixed on how does it get to be 50% in one bill and 100% in another bill? What's magic about those numbers? But thank you for your responses. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Mariani?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony today to the witnesses. And I apologize, I need to speak into the mic, so I'm not dissing you by showing you the back of my head as I ask questions. So I've been here for a while, and I remember a major move in this regard. I believe it was then State Senator Larry Poggemiller who created, and I would ask staff to correct me on this, that created the targeting relative to this categorical aid. And he was then the chair of the K-12 Finance Committee in the Senate. So this is going to go back a few years. And I don't recall all of the rationale at that point. I have some vague memories of it, and I have some feelings about that. But I guess my first question is, and this would be for both of the authors and or their witnesses, if they can tell us what is, I mean, there's a purpose for why we're targeting these funds, one would presume, because we took the extraordinary steps to write those into state statute. We don't do that normally with, put that sort of a fine point, if you will, relative to a number of other appropriations, including in K-12. So I'm wondering if you could share with us what you know. And this is not a got you. I'm just really want to know what you know. And I will certainly dig around as well afterwards. But what you know about what the purpose and the rationale was in the legislature well over a decade ago when we went in this direction.
Representative Hertaus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Mariani. To be perfectly honest, I cannot speak for those legislators 10 years ago and what their purpose was. I could only suspect that there was an intent to target specifically the dollars for a specific goal and to have accountability, as I mentioned, the euphemism of shackles and shekels. But I think what we've seen over the many years is that our population has greatly changed, and the demographics of our population throughout the state. And just this last weekend, I was on the road on legislative issues and finding large, minority populations in rather unsuspecting places like Wilmer and Benson and whatnot. So I think it's important to recognize that the student populations and our demographics have changed, and that this has become more of a universal issue. And I don't think we need quite the restrictions that we had on this legislation that was started many years ago, and that we provide the greater local control and honor what we believe we're having our local officials and our school boards and school superintendents do.
Representative Wills or Mr. Yanowski?
Representative Mariani, Chair and members of the committee, my understanding of compensatory education is it's provided to students in poverty with the goal of, as poverty is a high correlate in regard to student achievement, with regard to closing the achievement gap for all of our students and providing opportunity for every student to achieve to high levels. The reason for providing that in relation to poverty is that school districts have not been as successful in breaking that correlation. in trying to find ways to ensure that all students in our public education system can achieve. And what we find within districts similar to Richfield Public Schools or St. Paul Public Schools, where you're housed, sir, is that there are other factors that end up correlating also to achievement. And so the reason for me to be here to talk about flexibility is in relation to, for us, there are other factors in our dual language school beyond poverty that do align. So.
Representative Wills?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, just to add to that, I think that that's been the goal when it was set forward to close the achievement gap and focus on poverty. And I don't think that's changing in either of these bills. I think the goal is still to reach those students who need the resources the most. And unfortunately, the current formula is very restrictive and doesn't allow the school districts to have the flexibility to really target those services to the kids who need it most. And that's what I see both of these bills as doing, is making those services more flexible to be targeted towards the kids who need it.
Representative Mariani?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I get that. And I would certainly open that question up to the other testifiers who may have some longer history here. I get the purpose that's being stated here. I do think it's important for us as state legislators, however, to have a firm understanding of the historical purposes for why we have laws on the books. I am only guessing, and this is based on vague memory, and I said that at the beginning, so this is not a got you at all, that part of what at least the Senate was responding to was a sense that these funds were in fact not being used in a targeted way and were being distributed to provide other supports for students for which they were not being allocated for. And I get the whole issue around local control, but let's not be naive here, folks, you know, and let's not be apologetic, quite frankly, as state legislators, entrusted with, you know, making in this area $20 billion worth of investments every 2 years. That's a really big responsibility. And I love our school districts, our school board members. I get around the state and meet with many of those folks. But I am not going to exercise my duties well simply by telling my constituents, the people of Minnesota, that I'm just going to throw the money out the window and let them figure out, you know, what the best thing is in terms of using this. There is a purpose, as was shared, for these funds. I'm not totally opposed to moving in this direction at all. However, I want to make sure that the state has strong, transparent assurances within an accountability system for the proper use of these funds, which are meant to be targeted for low-income students. I do think Representative Hertaus is correct that the landscape has changed in this state, and tragically, members, here's how the landscape has changed. Child poverty is higher than it was a decade ago. It's way higher than it was 20 years ago. And not only that, but it's widespread. It's not just concentrated in my district like it was when I first ran for office 24 years ago. It's pretty much everywhere around this state, and that begs a whole nother question. But I do think that that is a valid argument for us to be able to have perhaps a more flexible appropriation here. However, to do that without understanding what motivated this in the first place, and for us, therefore, then not to ask an appropriate quid pro quo of our local school boards about assurances that they're not going to take these funds and use them for purposes that they're not intended to, I don't think that's an unfair expectation of ourselves. And so I would encourage the authors of both of these bills to carefully ponder what I just said and think about ways in which those kind of assurances may be able to be built into. We've got bright superintendents like the superintendent from Richfield here who I think could probably come up with that. And I would certainly work with you on this. But members, I do think we should slow down here and make sure, and I know the intent is to lay this over, to make sure that we can point to these funds and speak to the public about their being used for the appropriate purposes which really are meant to be targeted for low-income students, precisely for all the reasons that the superintendent just gave us from Richmond.
All right, thank you. And actually, I'm going to ask a follow-up question to whoever wants to take this, whether Mr. Yanowski or any of the representatives from AMSD or MSBA or that. But just within Representative Mariani's comments in mind, and I think they are thoughtful and ones we ought to pay attention to, but could you just clarify or give us sort of a breakdown of what school districts currently are required to provide in terms of reporting on efforts to help close the achievement gap, and particularly, I know the World's Best Workforce has some pretty stringent new reporting requirements, and it seems to me that kind of gets a little bit to the question or to the conversation brought up here, because you are required to track and to report how you're doing, and I would assume that some of your expenditures with compensatory dollars fits into that. Whoever wants to take that.
That's a good question.
Mr. Cronquist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott Cronquist with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. And members, I think you're having a great discussion, and I think Representative Anzels and Representative Mariani raised very appropriate questions you as state policymakers should be asking. I think the landscape has changed dramatically, though, and Representative Mariani, to get to your specific question, I think it is very clear that the reason that the formula was originally directed to send that money to the sites that generated the money was exactly that, to make sure the revenue was spent on students that generated that, on the students that qualified for free and reduced lunch. But what has changed over the years, in addition to what Representative Hertaus talked about in terms of the massive shift in demographic changes, think about what's happened at the policy level as well since then. I mean, when that requirement went into place, that was pre-NCLB, right? So before we were testing annually, 3rd through 8th grade in high school, before we were disaggregating that data and showing very clearly the achievement gaps that did exist, and it was certainly way before World's Best Workforce legislation, which now I think you have as policymakers put into law, very clear benchmarks that school districts are required to meet, whether it's all students ready for kindergarten, reading by 3rd grade, right, graduating from high school, eliminating gaps, and making sure everyone's graduating from high school, college, and career ready. So you have established those benchmarks now. You are holding your school boards and administrators accountable. And I have no doubt that if you adopt this increased flexibility, and if you don't see the results, I'm guessing you're going to come back and change the law back and say, school districts, we gave you a little flexibility, and we're not seeing the results we wanted to see, so I think we need to make the change back. But we're willing to accept that challenge, is what I'm hearing from my school boards and administrators. And we think that if you do give that extra flexibility, they are going to be able to make progress.
Representative Mariani.
Madam Chair, thank you, Mr. Cronquist. And you're absolutely correct. The context has changed in that regard as well. And I think we're a better legislature for that. I don't know all of the actual quantitative reporting tools and mechanisms that we can deploy relative to tracking the dollars. But would your community be supportive of some kind of an assurancy framework here that will make it real clear that these particular dollars are contributing to furthering the world's best workforce goals? I know that technically that could be very difficult, so I'm not going to hold you to, but again, I do think that, I do fear this notion that the money can wind up, in pretty big pools where we're not getting the maximum return for them. Now, I'm not questioning the motives or the intents of our local folks at all, but just conceptually, would you be willing to look at ways in which we can develop those kind of dollar assurance, flows that gives us a good picture here about how effective this particular investment as a categorical is turning out to be?
Solomon?
Yeah. Madam Chair, members of the committee, again, Jeff Solomon. I've been a business manager for schools for over 25 years. I'm on my 12th year with the Rosemont Apple Valley Egan School District. And again, both of the House files that you've heard proposed today does not change the requirements of the use of the money. It really speaks to the allocation of the money. And so getting to the question about accountability and reporting out to ensure that the funds are used for the intended purpose through UFAR's reporting, we are required to track those funds now. These files would not change that in any way other than the flexibility of a school board to make up to 50% in one, up to 100% in another, decisions of where those allocations are going, locations, how the funds are used, are tracked through UFARs, and we have to demonstrate that they are used for one of those 12 criteria area specific to current law.
Thank you. Representative Murphy. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Yanowski, did you want to comment on that as well? Did you want to add additional? Go ahead.
Representative Mariani. So as a first-year superintendent, I'm just learning about some of the reporting mechanisms. I can say that we are in the middle of our achievement and integration budget, where, for an illustration, we spreadsheet out every single position and every single dollar that we pay for, and the specific location and the intent. And so we are just filling out, with our integration funds, a worksheet that shows we have an outreach worker working at one school with the goal of increasing parent involvement utilizing the Spanish language. We have one person doing reading intervention at one particular school to ensure that we close the achievement gap. And it spreads out to that level of detail is the expectation for reporting. And so as I'm learning with the expectations of having flexibility but also reporting mechanisms and transparency, all this information is provided to Minnesota Department of Education, and all this is part of the expectation, both remaining within these bills.
All right. Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Mariani, you know, for the few years that I've been here and the research I've done, even in the area of integration funding, we've committed 20 years of resources for the express purpose of lowering the achievement gap, and that hasn't happened. We haven't really moved the needle in Minnesota on the achievement gap. And so I look at this as a way and an opportunity to really unleash the innovation that our individual school boards have and our districts and superintendents, and let them report to us what's working for them. This gives them an opportunity to do that. And I would remind you that even, you know, in the bill, it still has to be carried out according to a plan that would be adopted. It's just not willy-nilly of just taking money and spending it on other things. As other testifiers have mentioned, and as Mr. Strom has mentioned, the uses of the money are still very specific. But what this bill does, in both of these bills, is just allow greater flexibility to apply those dollars district-wide. And if we're really going to try to move in a direction of doing something about this achievement gap and not just making it rhetoric and political rhetoric, if we're really committed to making a difference, then we ought to use the talent that we have locally to see what works and what doesn't.
Right, Representative Mariani, and just members, I have 4 other representatives on the list, and I would like to spend at least 5 minutes talking about the forecast changes and pertinent to compensatory at the end. So just to set a little time frame for us. Representative Mariani.
Madam Chair, I'll be very brief, but unfortunately Representative Hertaus shared something that's not true. He didn't do that on purpose because he hasn't been here this long, but the 20 years of our integration investment, the problem with that was precisely that it wasn't targeted for reducing gaps. The integration program that existed, which I support, was really only singularly focused on ensuring that our state not slide into a racially segregated society in our public schools. We've only been halfway successful with that. However, a number of us for a number of years thought that the purpose for any kind of investment in K-12 should always be about academic achievement, including closing gaps. And so we reformed that particular formula 2 years ago. It was my bill. We came really close to getting rid of the entire integration program in this legislature. we reform those dollars precisely to do to be targeted on closing gaps in academic achievement, but doing that within the framework of preventing racial segregation of our public schools. So now we have dual purposes here. So it's not a major point to this, but that was a pretty big reform that we did, and we should all be proud of that, quite frankly. So I just want to make sure that the record reflects that. Obviously, we'll continue the broader debate about accountability and reporting and assurances. I think those are proper conversations for us to have relative to that.
Thank you, Representative Mariani. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I've heard today is that for years, compensatory aid has been a top priority next to per pupil unit formula. And what I'm hearing in these two bills is we want to cut that in half, the compensatory aid in half. And it seems to me that if we cut that aid in half, it is no longer compensatory aid. Well, it was 100% compensatory aid, and then it went down to 90%, and now we're going down to 50%, where that it's not going to be used at the site. And the school district has the authority to use their own powers of making decisions rather than have the legislature in St. Paul making the onerous decisions on how that money should be spent. So it seems to me that if this is going to be continually be compensatory aid, following the guidelines that have been established up to this point, we have to keep it at the 90%, or where it's at now. With the 5% fine, that's been fought and won. But now we're going down from 90 to 50. So it seems to me that if we want to keep it at compensatory aid revenue for these school districts on the growing schedule, who gets it and why, and meeting the needs of those kids and the formula, we have to keep it up at 90. If it goes down to 50, why don't we just take the money, all the money then, and put it on the per pupil aid formula and say, yes, we do believe in the local control. I think it guts it. I think changing it down to 50 guts it. Having six, Mr. Strom said there's 6 or handful of school districts that are already on pilot projects and a plan. I know in the interim, before we talk about this again, I'm going to ask the department to see what one of those plans looks like and how different are the plans. But we've gone a long way today in discussing whether this is a priority or not, if compensatory aid is indeed a priority. And the components that go in the formula are still priorities that we should continue to pass. But rather than just discuss House File 567 and 1222, maybe we should be discussing the philosophy of the formula and see where we're at. And before I know we're going to hold it over, but we've got a lot of thinking to do. And I don't know, when Representative Quam talked about gaming, it seems to me that changing the formula down from 90 to 50 is kind of gaming. So I think we're really have to talk about whether this should be as high of a priority as it has been.
Well, I'm going to allow the testifiers to offer any comments they want, and I would just say to Representative Murphy, I think both is the answer, my answer to your questions. Yes, I think we need to determine the priority level for this stream of funding, as we will all streams of funding that go to our schools currently, or anything new that's proposed. And the other is the formulas and how those funds are distributed and how they must be spent. Is that the best way to allocate those funds per the purposes designated for those funds? And so I think that's kind of what we're here to talk about, and we'll have more discussions about it. But I wanted to offer any of the testifiers an opportunity to respond or comment if you wish. Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't think that Representative Murphy meant, although she said that this would result in a cut, it doesn't change the amount of funding that comes to a district. It would change the minimum requirement with regard to allocation per facility. Again, when you mentioned about why don't we just put it on the formula, that may be preferred. However, this funding is still dedicated to the specific uses and preferences for which it originates. So it's still being used for the same purposes. It's just giving more flexibility to carry out those programs and target all of the students in the district rather than just singularly a certain concentration within the district.
Mr. Yudowski.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Representative Murphy. We're not talking about reducing a very extremely important funding mechanism. We're talking about funding that goes to students who are not currently achieving at grade level. The current formula talks about poverty as being the mechanism by which we calculate how that funding goes. The conversation we're having is about, can we become a little bit more flexible to ensure that students who are not achieving, so we're not talking about changing these funds and serving students who are at and above grade level. We're talking about more flexible ways of using the funds for students who are below grade level to meet those needs. Right now, the sole mechanism by which we can utilize those funds is poverty. And poverty is the most highly connected correlate we have at this time, but there are definitely other factors that go into that. And so the reason I support the conversation regarding flexibility is it would allow me to utilize student achievement and create formulas at my district level, which is what I would like to do, and allocate some of my staff more based on students who are below grade level than solely based on poverty, which would allow me to provide at Richfield Dual Language School additional literature, additional intervention, and additional supports for students who are not currently at grade level. And so I wouldn't see this as gutting by any stretch of the imagination. I would see this as a mechanism by which I could use my local conversation to serve students who may not be in poverty, but students who are absolutely not at the standards we like to have in the state of Minnesota.
Representative Mullery.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, I disagree with the proposal from Rosemount, and I think my family probably put in enough to build at least one school in Rosemount, paying taxes in Rosemount School District from 1856 till 2007. But I know why this formula was put in, and I could see it, and it was a senator from Minneapolis, and I know what it was like before because my dad was a teacher there, and I remember when he said that at Patrick Henry on the north side they were using manual typewriters. He went to Central South Side, they were using the latest, like the fourth version of the electronic typewriters, if anybody's old enough to remember those. And then went to Southwest High School, and they had new computers. It went like that all the time until it became site-specific. I don't want to pay. I'm very happy to pay for, in the Osseo district, for dollars going to Park Center and the grade school that's on roughly Zane, I believe it is, because they need it. I'm not willing to pay extra dollars for Western Maple Grove students. It's the same way I saw what happened in Robbinsdale when their district expanded. The voting power went to New Hope, et cetera. the Robbinsdale kids got basically left out of everything. Everything fancy went to the schools out there. I can see that this is clearly an effort, or maybe not an effort, but it's going to really end up increasing the achievement gap, which is the opposite of what people are claiming it's trying to do. There is just so many studies that show that concentration of poverty increases the problem exponentially, and so we have to keep that in. Before the superintendent from Richfield started talking about this, I had immediately thought of creating an exception, for instance, for language barriers, and I'm totally open to some narrow, for instance, I know the person from Richfield, I know Richfield area is and has challenges, and so I think if they want to work on some narrow exceptions to add to the present, I think that that's certainly, we should very strongly consider that, but as the proposal of these two bills, I just think is going the opposite way of any effort to try and bring up the people who are not succeeding in our society, in which we need our future. All of us are eventually going to be looking to them to keep our economy going. And so we need to invest our money where that's going to happen.
Right. Representative Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try to be brief. But my school district, Anoka-Hennepin, is one of the school districts that has been running a pilot program, and they've had this flexibility. The result of the flexibility is that we have closed the achievement gap across all categories of students. And I think, you know, we as elected officials have the purse strings here, but we have to also give credit to the elected officials who serve on the school boards. If they don't perform, they'll be voted out. And we need to continue to give them the flexibility that they need. So, and we do have that 12 criteria. As long as we stay within the criteria, meet the criteria, we have annual reports that are published in the newspapers to show what progress school districts are making. And I am on both bills. I support both bills. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate the last comments, because I was getting worried. I was on the Byron School Board, I was on the ZED Governing Board, where several school districts got together and worked, and all my experiences were the number one thing was how can we help the kids? And frankly, too often, you know, we work with numbers in groups, and we sort of, there are kids out there, but when you get to the school boards and the administration and the teachers, it's not numbers, it's names and faces. And I keep hearing about these horror stories, and I know no one in the districts I've been involved with that would go ahead and take this to put in jacuzzis and pools and stuff at another school. They would like the flexibility because students are individuals. The schools, every few years, you've got pretty much a new population. You need that flexibility to address and help the kids. And frankly, a dedicated, caring adult who knows their face, their name, sees them day in, day out, should have that flexibility to try programs that'll work. Now, maybe there are some districts, and maybe we should start addressing the ones that continually we try things with and there aren't results because there's something wrong. Because we've got a lot of districts where I don't mind handing them the flexibility because their primary, as it should be, are those kids they see day in, day out. So I support adding this flexibility just because I trust the people that actually know the kids that these dollars are going to help. And that's where I come from. And I'm happy that at least someone else, agrees that we've got good people in our school boards and our administrations.
All right. Representative Dabney, I'm going to give you the last word in 30 seconds because we do have to end this committee, and we will talk about the forecast. We're going to have to push it till tomorrow. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's particularly in response to Representative Quam's several comments today. The challenge is that there are two things that are true at the same time. We all know teachers and administrators who want to do the right thing. I take nothing away from the gentleman in front of us. I assume that their intent is nothing but good. But at the same time that's true, I can think of one suburban school district where the superintendent attempted to redraw the school district attendance lines so that the schools were more equitable, so that the poverty was not as concentrated as you originally raised concerns about in your first comments tonight. She was run out of town for trying to do that, and it's the chair's own district. No offense, Madam Chair, it's just a fact. That woman was run out of town for trying to provide more equal educational opportunities for low-income kids.
She resigned, Representative Dabney.
I'm going to stay where I am. Technically correct, but I don't think that was unrelated to her proposal to redraw the school lines in your district and make them more equitable so that more kids were going to schools that were more racially and economically diverse. Thank you.
Well, we'll come back to that topic since it is my school district and a sensitive topic, and we'll have lots to share on it at another time. So with that, I want to ask Representative Hertaus and Representative Wills very quickly any closing comments and then renew your motions, and we'll come back to the forecast tomorrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House File 1222 is a bipartisan bill, and at minimum has the support of the bipartisan juries on it, and I would ask to renew the motion.
All right, so motion renewed, and both House File 1222 then for referral to the General Register and 567 as well, but both to be laid over. And thank you both. Thank you to the testifiers. We appreciate the good discussion today, and we are adjourned.